But here's what's interesting about this sermon series. Just through Romans 12, we're taking piece by piece. Here's what's interesting about it. It seems like every week we come to the same point about 2/3 of the way through the sermon. We paint this beautiful picture of whatever it is we've been talking about that day, and we look at Jesus in his perfect standard, and we see how great it looks for us to be living that out. Like if we would realign ourselves to what Jesus did and how he lived it out, man, it would be so life-giving. This would be a perfect place to be. We see that, but the question always comes up at this point, okay, how? How in the world do we ever get to that point? Because innate in us is competition, is putting you down so I win, right? That's innate flesh stuff. So how do we ever get to delighting in showing honor to one another? How do we get to loving each other like Christ loved the church? Like Trevor talked about last week, caring for each other, right, in real tangible ways. How do we get there? Like those things come up every single time we hit this point. So how do we get to this honor? Well, here's the final point. It's going to answer that question, hopefully. Honor flows from honor. How do we ever get to this point? It's because honor flows from honor. Like when you pick up a dry sponge and squeeze it, that's pretty useless, right? We can't give what we don't have. So here's what I mean by that. Think back to that part of Philippians 2 I read earlier, how the church maintains unity. I'm gonna read it again. This is Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." Again, that's the desired future. That's the picture painted of the way we should be. Well, look at what happens next in verse 5. "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus." Did you see that? What he's saying there, he's like, think and act like I just described in verses 3 and 4. Humble self, serving others, looking to count others more significant. Do all of that. Verse 5 says, because you already have the mind to be able to do it. Now, verse 5 is so interesting because notice it's like there's a command and a promise. He says, have this mind among yourselves. That's a command. Basically, he's saying, think like Jesus. Well, then you're saying, well, how can I do that? Then what does he finish with? Because you already have the mind of Christ. Have this mind in yourselves because you already have it. You can think like this. You can act like what I just described because you have the mind of Christ now. What he's saying is that if you are a believer, if you've turned from your sin and turned from yourself in Jesus for your salvation, you can now think like he thinks. You have the mind of Christ, Corinthians says. You can think and act like this. You can grow in your ability to understand what he wants you to do. It's what Romans 12:2 said, remember? You are not to be conformed to this world, but you're to be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what's the will of God, good, acceptable, and perfect. So again, you have the mind of Christ now. You can grow in your renewal of that mind over time. That is how we begin to compete at out-honoring one another.